When it comes to podcasting, though, and I mentioned, consider what people are doing when they're listening to a podcast. They're walking their dog, they're doing the dishes, pulling weeds from a garden, driving to work. In other words, they're doing normal life, and you're with them while they are doing normal life. That's a way more intimate setting, a way more intimate relationship than if I'm just sitting at my desk looking at my computer screen reading a blog. But if you share your own stories, who else can do that? No one else has the same stories you do. If you want to be average, just let it go. If you want to be world class, if you want to be great, everything matters. And if you are really committed to being world class, you have to take that to heart. Everything matters.
Welcome to Wisdom Journal. Today's guest is Jody Maberry, a former park ranger who became the happiest podcaster on earth. Jody has worked with top executives from Disney, Morgan, James Publishing, and other major brands, helping them craft their personal brands and refine their message through storytelling. In this episode, we'll dive into podcasting, personal branding, and the secrets behind being a great podcast, guest, and host. Let's get started. Just before we get started, I'd love for you to tell us about yourself.
Yeah, well, good. So I'm a former park ranger. I live in Washington State in the United States, and I was a financial analyst at a commercial bank who became a park ranger, which is fulfilling a boyhood dream of becoming a park ranger. It was fantastic, and I left that, went back to school to get an MBA. And once I finished that, I wanted to bring in some leadership management lessons that I learned while I was in business school back in the parks. Well, instead of going back and becoming a park ranger, I did that by starting a podcast called The Park Leaders Show. And I started that podcast I recorded the first episodes in 2013 and then drug my feet, kept coming up with the excuses on why I shouldn't launch the show. And I finally did launch it in 2014. And that's been my longest running show. That show led to then creating Disney Magic, and that led to some other shows. Over the years now, I've done more than 2,600 episodes and hundreds of interviews, and big advocate of podcasting and the people that you meet through podcasting and the opportunities that it brings. So there's a little bit about who I am and where I came from in the world of podcasting. And what's really neat about it is I live in a small town way on the corner of the United States. And yet through podcasting, I get connected to people all over the country, all over the world, Nigeria. I just came back from Chile in South America. It's just been amazing, the people you meet, the opportunities that come just from podcasting and meeting new people, which always leads to new opportunities.
Yeah, thank you so much for the quick rundown. Just for those who might be listening, probably not even familiar with the concept of a park ranger. What is a park ranger? Who is a park ranger? And what does a park ranger do?
Well, this will sound like a joke at first, but a park ranger simply ranges the park. Hence the name park ranger. But but that's what we do. And I am not familiar with the park system in Nigeria, but park rangers are found all over the world. And typically what it is if there is a park ranger's responsibility is to range throughout that park and protect the resources, protect the people, protect the wildlife. There are some places where it's very dangerous. Africa loses a lot of park rangers every year to poachers. Not that they're poaching park rangers, they're poaching animals, but the park rangers are there to protect the animals, and then the poachers kill park rangers. But park rangers in Africa also sometimes get killed by the very animals that they're protecting. Here in the United States, that rarely happens. Yes, we've got big animals like bison and grizzly bears here, but very rarely does it lead to a situation like that. But if you've ever been to a park, you there's a good chance you were greeted by someone in a tan and green uniform and the iconic flat hat, sometimes called Smokey Bear hat here in the United States, with a smile and a greeting and willing to answer questions and point you in the right direction. That's what a park ranger does.
Yeah. Well, thanks for breaking it down for those of us that don't understand. How did you transition from working in nature to now working behind the mic?
So it initially came from starting that first podcast, the Park Leader Show, that I had this idea of taking business lessons and transferring it into parks. I was originally going to do it just with a simple blog, writing articles every week. A friend of mine, though, had started a podcast. Jared Easley started a podcast called Starve the Doubts. And that show was, I enjoyed it. I listened to it every week. I recommended a guest to Jared, someone I thought would be a good fit for his show. And he said, I'll do it so long as you're my guest co-host.
Yeah.
And I had no idea what I was doing. I was terrible on the first time I guest hosted, but he had me keep coming back to guest host on his show. And I realized, well, that's a really good way to get my message out and these lessons that I want to get out to park rangers. So I started the Park Leader Show. That was my first step into podcasting. At some point that first year, though, I wanted to talk to someone from Disney about what parks, national parks, state parks, could learn from theme parks about operating better and serving customers better. I didn't have a connection at Disney, but I found the book Creating Magic on Amazon. I bought that. It was a fantastic book, still is a fantastic book. I reached out to the author and asked him to come on to my show. And I thought, what are the chances that the executive vice president of Walt Disney World would come on this small podcast for park rangers? But what I didn't know, his sister-in-law had been a park ranger for 30 years. So he said, I love park rangers. I'll come on the show. And it worked out really well. That episode went great. So he came back. We did a second episode. And through that conversation, it led to us deciding to do a podcast together. Creating Disney Magic, we launched it towards the end of 2014. And we recently published episode 551. It's had millions of downloads. And then that led to doing some other shows. So initially, my journey into podcasting came because I wanted a way to remain connected to park rangers, the people that serve nature and park visitors. And then once I met Lee Cockrell and started doing that show, that then led to other podcasts that I've done and still do.
Wow. Wow. For me, it's amazing what happens when you just ask. And
Yeah, that's right. And I just asked Lee, it would have been easy to say, well, Lee's going to say no, I'm just not going to ask. But if just let people say no for themselves. Don't say no for other people. That's the approach I took, and it worked out.
yeah. You are known for helping people tell better stories. What's the secret to making podcast content more engaging?
Well, I think part of it is weaving stories into it. That's one. Two is understanding interpretation. That's one thing that park rangers do well. When you asked, what do park rangers do? And I joked and said, we range the park. That is true, but we also tell a lot of stories. And there is a particular formula to it. It's not just telling a story. I call it the SWAP formula. Park rangers use it, museums use it, zoos use it. Anyone that tells a good story and then gets you interested in doing something about what you learned, use it. If you've even had a good tour bus driver, they use interpretation. And I use interpretation in podcasting. So it's telling a story. That's the S in SWAP. It's why it matters to the listener. It's the action you want them to take. And then you try to provoke them to take that action. And I think understanding interpretation can really help in podcasting. Well, podcasting one is as simple as you have a microphone, you can talk into it. Now you have a podcast. But if you want to have engaging content that connects with people, it has to go a little deeper than that. And that's why I use interpretation when it comes to podcasts. It works really good when you're doing solo episodes. It can also work good if adjusted for interviews.
Yeah. You mentioned the swap method. I just didn't get it completely. I only had the story S part, the action part, the P part, provoke. What about the W?
The W is why it matters, not why it matters to you, why it matters to the person listening. And that works for podcasting. It works if you're on the stage talking to an audience. It works if you're writing blog posts. It even works if you're talking to your neighbor or a family member and you want them to be interested in what you're talking about. So that's it. The S is story, why it matters to the person listening, the action you want them to take, and then provoke them to do it.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for that framework. It's part of those things I'm going to write down. Swap stories, why it matters to the audience, the action you want them to take, and provoke them to take the action. Okay. A lot of podcasters they're trying to connect with their audience, but what are some of the biggest mistakes you see them make in an attempt to try to connect with their audience?
Well, there are some simple mistakes that people make when they're starting out. I think one of the biggest is not acting like the listener is there with you. For example, as we're talking now, my approach is that there's three of us here. There's Jody Maberry, there's Wisdom, and there's one listener. I always try to talk in an interview like there's three of us. If you approach podcast in that way, you will connect with a listener. And the reason I only talk as if I'm talking to one listener is because think about when you listen to podcasts. You're not sitting in a group listening to podcasts. You're by yourself, walking your dog, doing the dishes, pulling weeds in the garden, driving to work. You're usually by yourself. I rarely listen to a podcast with other people. So if the podcast host talks as if there is an audience of 1,000 people, it will go right over your head. But if the podcast host or guest talks as if there's just one person, I feel like they're talking to me. So that's the approach that I take. And I'm always careful then in the language I use. I don't say to all the listeners, I don't say I always use words as if it's one person that you, so if even right now I act like it's me, you, a single listener, and from time to time I will address that single listener as if they're just sitting right here to the left of me at my desk. I also am very careful about not saying things like to all of you out there, or if you're listening, because, well, of course you're listening or you wouldn't hear what I say. There's a podcast that I subscribe to it's from a big worldwide magazine, and they have a paid podcast subscription. Every once in a while, they will say, if you're listening to this, it means you're a premium subscriber. Well, it's the wrong way to do it, because of course I'm listening to this or I wouldn't hear that message. As an example, instead, they should say, since you're listening to this, it means you're a premium subscriber. If you're listening implies like, maybe I'm not listening to it, but I wouldn't hear it if I wasn't. It's just simple things like that to be mindful of. What are people doing when they listen to your show? Who are they with? And how would you talk to them if they were right there with you? I'm always mindful of things like that. And I think that is what makes a podcast feel like a conversation, which therefore feels more engaging to the people that are listening.
Wow. Thank you so much for that framework. These are some of the things that I will be implementing on my own podcast too. Well, you earlier on when you were sharing your story quickly and giving the rundown, you said you wanted to start a blog, you wanted to start writing an article, right? So I'm curious, what are some of the unique advantages you see with podcasting compared to other content formats like the blog or the article you were thinking about doing when you first thought about creating content?
Well, I'll tell you the biggest one. Think about what you're doing when you are reading a blog. You're usually sitting at your desk reading that blog. Maybe you're looking at your phone, scrolling and reading a blog. Even YouTube, you probably are sitting down, laying on your couch, watching YouTube. When it comes to podcasting, though, and I mentioned, consider what people are doing when they're listening to a podcast. They're walking their dog, they're doing the dishes, pulling weeds from a garden, driving to work. In other words, they're doing normal life, and you're with them while they are doing normal life. That's a way more intimate setting, a way more intimate relationship than if I'm just sitting at my desk looking at my computer screen reading a blog. I think of all the other formats, that's what makes podcasting more special, more relationship building, because you are with me while I'm just doing my daily life. And that can become a very special relationship.
Yeah. It's a good thing you mentioned podcasting because when people consume podcasting, they usually focus. There's a way they consume a podcast is different from the other forms of media. And it's usually a privileged position to be if you have a podcast. You know, you go into their routine, you become part of their life. It's not just, oh, here's a YouTube video, I should watch it, it's brilliant. No, it's more like I'm going to work, I'm on the train, I'm listening to your podcast. I'm washing the dishes, I'm listening to your podcast. I'm cleaning my room, I'm listening to your podcast. And that itself, it's a privileged position to be as a content creator. Wow. I guess the question is, a lot of persons they say podcasting helps build someone's authority in the industry, in the niche. So for me, I'm curious, how can podcasting help someone establish their authority in their niche or industry?
I think there's three ways. The first one is the most overlooked way, but it is my favorite reason why you should start a podcast or have a podcast or keep doing your podcast. When you have to show up every week with something to say, you will learn a lot about yourself. You will learn how to talk about your ideas. You will learn how to shape your ideas. You will learn how to have discussions about whatever niche that you are in. And that does some really special things for you when you have to show up every week and talk about it. Just by doing that, even if you don't get a single listener or it's just your mother, you will become more of an expert and more of an authority by talking about your topic every week, even whether it's solo, whether it's an interview. You will become more of an authority by doing that. Okay, so that's one. Number two is you will meet a lot of people who are also authorities in your area. And by doing that, your name gets associated with them. You learn from them. You have discussions with them. Maybe they become part of your network. So that's another way. And then the third is podcasting can lead to other platforms, getting invited to speak, getting asked to be a guest on other podcasts. So it's that constant feed of other platforms, other appearances make you an authority in that. The Park Leaders Show for me has led to speaking on stages I normally never would get invited to. I've spoken at the World Ranger Congress. I've spoken to different state park systems here in the United States. I've spoken at the Association of State Park Directors. It just opens up stages and platforms you wouldn't get if you didn't have a podcast and viewed as an authority.
Wow. Wow, I like the two concepts you explained. One, you get to like build your network of people in your industry by interviewing them as guests on your podcast, and then you also get to hone in your thoughts and refine your skills in your field by just talking about it, doing research, and diving deeper into the topic of the industry. Wow. Now, a lot of persons they have podcasts, right? But their podcast is just another Me Too podcast. Everybody has a podcast. There's a podcast. There's no unique value proposition. So I guess the question I'm asking right now is, how do we sit down and get to create a unique value proposition for our podcast so that when the people we've created the podcast for, when they see the podcast, they feel happy, even without listening to the podcast at all. Once they see your podcast, they see, oh, the short description, like, wow, I'm going to listen to this. Like it delights them because there's a unique value proposition. How do we go about doing that?
I think one of the best ways to do it is to share your unique stories. It's really easy to copy someone else's podcast format, but that's never going to be you. It's never going to be your personality. But if you share your own stories, who else can do that? No one else has the same stories you do. So if you understand how to use a story, this goes back to the interpretation method we talked about. If you understand how to use a story to then tie in lessons to your topic, there's no one else that can touch that. Even if they speak on the same topic, this is what will make it unique to you personally. This is what will make people look forward to hearing you and smile thinking, well, I get to hear Wisdom talk again this week. I've been looking forward to that. He always shares such good stories. I learn something a little new about him every week. I think that is how you do it. The other, if you have an interview podcast, understanding how to have good interviews really helps. You're doing a great job on this interview, Wisdom. I'm sure you've been on podcasts where the host is not quite prepared. Well, that there's two ways to look at that. One, sure, the host should be prepared, but as a guest, I'm always prepared to be on a podcast. So I showed up today. You're doing a great job, Wisdom. I was prepared even if you didn't do a great job. So there's two ways to look at that then. As a guest, I want people to have a great time, even if I'm on a show that I don't host. So that's not quite what you asked when you asked the question, but that's one of the ways I look at it, that be prepared for unprepared hosts, meaning come with stories, come with points you want to talk about. And then as an interviewer, just being really curious, doing research about people before they come on so you can find those little nuggets about things they've done and uncover some good stories. And if you're the host and a guest tells a story you already know, and you already know it because you did research, that is fine because the listener has not heard that story. And that's who you're trying to delight with your show, is the listener.
Cool.
And so it's fine if your guest tells a story you already know, or your guest tells something that you read in his blog post or heard him talk about on another podcast. That is completely fine because it's not about you, the host, it's about the listener. So if you understand that, where, okay, I'm asking questions that I already know the answer to, that is completely fine because your listener does not know that story.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. Like, so far that you mentioned you have about 2,000 episodes, right? And you started a podcast in 2013, and then you took kind of like a break or something like that, and then came back in 24. So far, you've been doing this. What kind of types of episodes, right? Would you say more like top 10 that that do really well, that kind of like help shine your personal?
Well, I do think one that can always help is to do monologue episodes. And by that, I mean you talking about the topic you are an expert in. Yes, interviews help. Yes, interviews connect you to people, especially if you do interviews where someone comes on your show and reinforces the things that you normally talk about. But if you want to be an expert in a topic and you want people to think about you as an authority and you want people to connect with you and listen to your show because of you, at least occasional monologue solo episodes really help. I think that is really good. Another format of show that I do, so if you look at Creating Disney Magic, I do that with Lee Cockrell, retired executive vice president, Walt Disney World. The way I approach that show, Lee Cockrell is the star, I am the host. My two roles are to make Lee Cockrell sound and look like he's brilliant. And my second role is to entertain the listener and make sure they learn something every episode. And so I view that different than an interview show. It's me and Lee every week. We don't have guests. Every week we show up. My role is to make Lee sound and look brilliant and entertain the listener. That and I think it really works. They're short episodes, 15 minutes. We do them every week. So that's a bit of a different format. Now, if you can mix all three in some format, monologue, interview, host and star, then I think, okay, you're providing enough variety. That's why one of my podcasts is called the Jody Maberry Show, and I always say, well, it's a variety show because I have so many different episode formats. I have so many different topics, different ways we discuss things, that it's not about just one thing and it's not just one format. I mix it up, and maybe I'll do an episode or a style that you don't like this week, but next week it might be different and you'll enjoy it more. So that's one of my approaches to my personal show, is make it a variety show. I do monologue episodes, I do interview episodes, I do host and star episodes. I will do episodes while I travel, so you may not know where I'll show up. I'll have the same guest back multiple times to go deeper into topics. So I approach that show quite a bit different than I do other shows. And it's almost like an experiment to see what works, what doesn't work, but I sure do have a lot of fun doing it.
Oh, I mean, at the end of the day, we are the chef, and we have the complete creative control to do whatever.
Yeah, that's right.
I guess I just to drill a bit deeper into the storytelling. You've worked with former Disney executives, right? And you've interviewed the former vice president of Disney, right?
Yeah.
Okay. What are some key branding lessons you've learned from them? Like, I mean, Disney, they're clearly doing something.
Yeah, I will tell you two right off the bat when it comes to branding. And one is that you are always on stage. Always. If anyone can see you or hear you, you are on stage and you're putting on a show. Understand your role in the show and always perform. So, with that, know what should be backstage. If you're going to be in front of people, look the part. So today I'm wearing a sweatshirt. Well, if my brand that I is shirt and tie, I should never show up like this. If my brand's a little casual, okay, sweatshirt is okay. But if my brand is shirt and tie, I should only wear a sweatshirt backstage where people can't see me.
Well,
Also, when you're on stage, how are you talking? If you're in front of people, if you're being recorded, there should be a certain way that you talk. There should be certain things that you say, certain things that you don't say. So that's the number one lesson I've learned from working with Disney executives. You are playing a role in a show. It's all a big performance. And when you are on stage, you have to perform like you're on stage. And the rest of it, save for when you're backstage. When the show's over, okay, well then if you want to talk different, if you want to use curse words, whatever, do it backstage when you're not putting on a show. That's one. The other thing I've learned about personal branding is how important details are. Lee Cockrell says if you want to be average, just let it go. If you want to be world class, if you want to be great, everything matters. And if you are really committed to being world class, you have to take that to heart. Everything matters if you're world class. It's like going into a 2-star hotel or a 5-star hotel. A 2-star hotel, they'll let some things go. You'll find cobwebs in the hallway, maybe a light burnt out in the hallway, but you'll never find that in a 5-star hotel. Never. You'll never see a cobweb. All the lights are on. Everything is precise. So that's the other thing that I've learned, that if you are saying you are professional, if you're saying you're world class, you have to mind the details, or you're just saying something that's not true.
Well, thank you so much for sharing those two branding techniques. You're always on stage. If people can see you, if people can hear you, you're on stage. And I know that's going to be a sound bite, a clip for social. You you've helped a lot of persons become podcast guests, right? To also build their brand by being guests on podcasts. Well, so I guess the question I want to ask now: what's the secret to making a lasting impression on a show or a podcast?
There some big points here on this. I'll just touch on a couple. One is tell stories. People remember stories. More than anything else, people remember stories. When appropriate, tell a story. Number two is have talking points. Before I'm ever on a show, I have a sense of what I'm going to talk about. Now, I don't know what questions are going to be asked. And maybe because of the questions, I never get to what I think I'm going to talk about. But if the conversation goes there, I'm going to talk about storytelling. I'm going to talk about using interpretation. There are just certain things I know I'm going to talk about. If you show up with stories and you show up with talking points, kind of like a politician, if you ever see a politician's interview, quite often they'll ignore your questions and then just say whatever they want to. You're not quite taking it to that extreme, but understand there are talking points and you want to get to them at some point. And then the third one is just remember there's a third person there. Don't forget the listener. If you want listeners to remember you, talk like they're there. If you want the host to listen to you, tell stories and just be in a good mood. Make sure you help the host put on a good show. So that's it. If you want the guest to, the listener to remember you, talk like they're there with you and tell good stories.
I love to take this further, and I love to go deeper. Someone reaches out to you to be, hey, hi, I love what you do. I love your experience. I love what I have a podcast. I love for you to come on my podcast, and you click their link, you book a time. Sure, let's do. I've booked it. I can't wait to see you. Now, the question I want to ask right now is, how do we prepare for such interview? Now that you've booked the time for an interview, how do you, what kind of preparation do you make such that you come ready? Because earlier on you talked about how as a guest you've made your own preparation so that whether the host is prepared or unprepared, you are prepared to give value to the audience. How do you do the preparation such that you come to give real value to the audience?
I think there's two sides to it. I prepare based on myself. That's the talking points. That's the stories. We already touched on that a little bit. And I'm certainly happy to go deeper into that. The other side, though, is to prepare yourself for the host. So find out a little bit about the host. Look at the episodes. At minimum, look at the episodes. What type of topics does the host talk about? If you can, listen to some episodes. If you can, read about the host. And I think that it's just important for a guest to not feel like I'm the special one. That's why I'm a guest on your show. View it the other way. The host is the special one, and they've invited me into their house to talk to their people. And if you approach it that way, then you'll have good manners. You'll tell good stories. You'll be entertaining, and you'll know a little bit about what to talk about. And I said, be prepared for an unprepared host. That's part of how you do it. Understand what the show is about overall. For example, if you had a show about knitting, well, maybe you wouldn't have invited me on because I don't knit. But if you did, I would prepare for a show about knitting much different than I would if I knew we were going to talk about podcasting.
Lord.
If it's a show strictly about podcasting, I would prepare for that different than I would a show about personal branding or marketing. So that's it. Just understand why, if you can, understand why the host invited you there. Why did the host ask you to be on the show? Because if you know a host invited you, let's say, to talk about podcasting. Okay, so the stories you will tell are going to lean towards podcasting. The lessons you're going to give are going to lean towards podcasting. Rather than to keep talking about, my goodness, I was just on this vacation. You won't believe how great it was. Or if the host wants to talk about podcasting, but I keep talking about writing copy for your sales page. Sure, it may be important, but that may not be why the host invited you to be on the show. So I think that is another avenue of that, is to realize why the host wanted you as a guest and give that information. Stick to that lane. Follow where the host leads you, because a good host will take you to some good places. And even if it's an unprepared host, understanding why you're on that particular show will help you still be a great guest.
Yeah. Oh, I like the fact that it's important that the guest and the host they are on the same page, so that the guest and the host they can go on the same journey towards the vision that the host has. So they're like, okay, I want at the end of this episode for all my listeners to get this, such that the guest is not going this way and the host going this way, and they're both like working against each other. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
right. What I want when I'm on a show, I want a listener to say two things. One, I really enjoy Jody Maberry, and two, I'm really glad Wisdom had him on the show. So, yes, I want them to like me, but I also want them to be glad that you had me on this. I want the listener to feel that. I'm glad Wisdom did that. So that's why you have to, as a guest, have the host in mind, because the ultimate goal for me is to make you look and sound good to your listeners. So that's why I've got to put on a good show so you look good.
Yeah. Over the years that you've been podcasting and you've been, advising other persons and helping other people with the podcast, what would you say is the major, most important, actually platform that works, not just one of the gimmicks that everybody's like, do this, do this, do when it comes to promoting your podcast to build your personal?
Well, I would say because you'll hear it if you just poke around a bit, you'll have people having you believe you need to be everywhere all the time. Maybe that's true. For me, it's being where the people who would listen to your show are. That could be LinkedIn. That's a good one if it's a business show. It could be
Yeah.
Instagram. It could be X. One that has worked really good for me for the Park Leader Show is to be at park conferences, because park rangers aren't a typical podcasting audience. But if you get in front of them face to face and you're handing out stickers and talking about your show, then they find out about it. Then they listen to it and give it a chance. So part of it is just being where your listeners are. And I would say, but if I had to give one blanket answer to that question, where's the best place to promote your podcast, is to be a guest on other podcasts, because
Oh,
people that are listening, you already know they're podcast listeners.
yeah.
So it's a tremendous place, because hopefully someone will listen to us talk and say, I want to know more about Jody. I really liked what he had to say. And then they'll go listen to the Jody Maberry show. That's ultimately what you want.
Yeah. I like it's straight to the point, and there's no like gimmicks and all. Now, I guess we've promoted our podcast, we've gotten a comment, we're creating content, we're showing up, we're doing all these things that you've advised us to. And we are podcasting because we want to build our personal brand. Of course, there's so many benefits and so many reasons why one could start a podcast and what one could hope to get out of the pod. But for in our scenario, we're doing the podcast because we want to build our personal brand, our authority, our credibility. Now, um, my question is, how do we measure the impact of our podcast on our personal brand? Like, how do we measure the?
I would say it starts with what's important to you. A lot of people will measure the impact of their podcast by the money it makes. I personally don't. I don't try to make money directly off the Jody Maberry show, off the Park Leader show. Let's use the Park Leader show as an example. I view the impact of that show based on people that reach out to me because they listen to it, and of the speaking opportunities that it gets me that I wouldn't have otherwise. Some people you will use metrics like download numbers, like how much money they make. I personally don't. I look at things that matter to me a little more. That's not to say those aren't important. If that's what you want to measure your show by, then do it. I like softer metrics like speaking invites per year or how many people reach out to me per year. It's really hard not to pay attention to downloads when you're a brand new podcaster. I get that, because it's a easy and feels like an obvious way to measure success of a podcast. So I'm not gonna say it's not important, because when you start it feels important. But what really matters is the connection you make with people, and that one can be harder to measure. That's why I say the people that reach out to me because they listen to an episode, and speaking opportunities that I get from it. So it really depends on what you feel is important. It can be that I get a sponsorship deal. It can be the numbers, uh, but my favorite metric, though, my favorite return on podcasting is what I learn from talking every single week.
Wow. 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 That's more like best. Wow. You mentioned listener feedback, and that for me, it's more like it's very qualitative. It's very important to actually see that people are getting value from what you're creating, and they're actually telling you this is not just about numbers or oh, we're getting millions or thousands of downloads. It's more like oh, so that your podcast episode on this it really helped my life. I was going through this, and that kind of like really helped me and inspired me to like get out of that mindset, and now I'm doing great. And that's itself, it's a really encouraging message to get as a host. So for me, the question now is how do we set up a system such that it's easy for listeners to give us feedback if they want to? Like, just the system is there to capture the.
Well, first, I will point out podcasting of all the platforms is the most difficult to get feedback from. And because it goes back to what we talked about of what people are doing while they listen to your podcast. If I'm in my backyard pulling weeds out of the garden, I'm not as likely to then go inside and send you an email. If I'm walking my dog through the neighborhood, I'm not as likely to stop and type out an email on my phone or find you on social media or whatever. So be aware of that. It is one of the most difficult platforms to get feedback on. But when you do get it, understand the effort people went through, because it's really easy to make a comment on a YouTube video. It's really easy to send off an email after reading a blog post. If someone reaches out to you after a podcast episode, they went through an effort to do that. So remember that. Now, on top of that, always make it easy. Every episode, let them know how they can reach out to you. Every episode in the show notes, maybe put a contact form that if I'm on my phone, then I can look at the show notes and just hit the button. Make it easy and tell your listener frequently how they can get in touch with you. Then the other is use listener questions or comments on your show, because one of the best things as a listener you can do for me is mention my name on your show. And if I hear you mentioning other people, it makes it a little more likely I'm also going to reach out, make a comment, ask a question. Yeah. So
Yeah.
those are the things I would look at. Also, if you can make something available. So here we're talking about podcasting. So maybe I'll say, hey, if this piques your interest about starting a podcast, go to my website. You'll find the Podcast Magic Guide and you can download that. So there's another way. Just make something available about the topic. Maybe you do it every episode. Maybe you do it once a month, whatever frequency, what you want to do, but that's another way to do it.
Yeah. Okay. Make it easy for listeners to contact you. Make them be aware that, excuse me, that you want to hear and see and read their feedback. You want to hear from them. That way they get to send message to you and talk and probably hop on the call, whatever the case might be. Well, I think the last two questions I want to ask now, and quickly I just want to like talk about them so because it's almost getting to an is how can podcasters attract high profile guests and build strong relationship with.
Okay, an easy way to do that. If there's someone that you would love to have on your show, if they launch a book, perfect time because they want to talk about their book. So that's one way. If they're coming out with a book right then, very easy time to get them on. People that don't normally even do podcast appearances will do it when they have a book coming out. If they don't have a book coming out, find something very specific. If they have a book in the past, perhaps there's something in chapter 7. I'm just making up a chapter. If there's something very specific in chapter 7 and you tell them, I loved your book. You said this in chapter 7. I would like to talk about that more on my show. The reason that sort of thing works is because most podcast hosts don't read the books of the authors that come on their show. What's the number one goal of an author is to have people read their book. So if someone reaches out and says, Chapter 7, you talked about this on these 2 pages, I would love to go deeper about that. That's very meaningful to an author. If they don't have a book, do something similar with a YouTube video or a podcast episode. So make it different than just, hey, would you come and be on my show? If someone is high profile, remember they get asked all the time, will you be on my show? Will you do this? If you can make it very specific, you will stand out. So that's it. Approach number 1. If there's someone you want on your show and they're coming out with a book, it's a perfect time to ask. If they're not coming out with a book, find a past book, find an article they wrote, a podcast episode, whatever, and ask very specifically, this is what I want to talk about, because it shows you pay attention and it shows you're interested in what they're talking about, not just because they're popular and you want them on your show because they're popular.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for that idea and that's tip. Like a lot of gears are just turning right now in my head.
Good.
Yeah. And finally, if you had to start a brand new podcast today, what would you do differently?
What I would do differently is I would use a new platform. We're talking today on Riverside. It is so easy to do a podcast with a new platform. I podcast the way I've always podcast, where I use an external recorder, and I would use the tools that make it easy so you don't have to worry about that. I continue, and I know I could make that switch myself now. I continue to podcast the way I've always done it because it's really easy for me. But if I was starting brand new, I would use these tools. There are tools like Riverside, Zencaster that make the interviews easy. There's AI tools to make show notes easy. I would do that and then devote my time to being a great host and then let the technology take care of the other parts.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much. Jody, this has been an incredible interview. I got a lot of inspiration. I got a lot of tips, and you came fully prepared. Like the way you just, if I asked a question, you just like diving deep into it. And wow, my God.
Mhm.
Oh, before we wrap up,
Okay.
where can listeners find you and learn more about?
Well, the best place is jodymaberry.com. You'll find out more about me. I do have a guide right there on the page, my front page, called Podcast Magic, in case you're interested in podcasting. And every podcast that I host is just look at the podcast link right there on my website, and you can find all the shows. So it's a great place to start, jodymaberry.com.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us and our listeners. And thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for listening to Wisdom Journey, the podcast for content creators. If today's episode sparked ideas, subscribe and leave a review. Share it with a fellow creator who might benefit. Check the show notes for links and resources. If you'd like to support the show, buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/wisdomhq. Follow us on social media to stay connected. Until next time, keep creating and seeking wisdom in your journey.